If you spent all night binge-watching Amazon Prime's new animated show Undone like I did, your brain is probably exploding with questions right now. Mine definitely is, and I'm gonna be refreshing Twitter every 15 seconds until I find out if Undone is getting a second season or not. And if not, I'm gonna time travel to Jeff Bezos' house and alter the course of his timeline to make him work at a water park in Oklahoma. Without the promise of another season, my biggest question is, what the hell was that ending all about? I'm Whitney Van Lanningham, and today we're breaking down the ending to Season 1 of Undone. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Super Nerd sponsor Charles Scheid. Thank you so much, Charles, for sharing your new Nerdwire patch with us on Twitter. If you want a cool patch like our friendo Charles here, check out the link to our Patreon in the description box and see if any of our donation tiers work for you. We'll reward you with prizes, blooper reels, behind-the-scenes looks, and other things. But that's enough of the business, so let's do a quick recap of the show. Undone follows the story of Alma, an extremely emotionally complex woman in her late 20s who seems to be moving through life on autopilot. After getting into a horrific car accident, Alma starts seeing her father. This wouldn't be an issue, except Alma's dad died in a car accident on Halloween night when she was a little kid, and neither her mother nor her sister nor her boyfriend can see or hear him because he's dead and Alma is trapped between her reality and her dead father's. Obviously, she decides to keep this little tidbit of information to herself, opting instead to go about her life as normal with frequent visits from her interdimensional daddy-o. While on a quantum realm trip, Alma's father, Jacob, tells her that he didn't actually die in a car accident that night. He was murdered for his work just as he was developing and testing his formula for time travel. Convinced that someone from the grant donor's company must have killed him to get to his formula, her father begs Alma to help him. He explains that she's the only one who can. Not only because she can communicate with him even though he is super dead, but because he believes she harnesses an untapped power to alter space and time itself. Now here's where things get tricky. I'm going to explain some backstory to the Winograd Diaz family that happened in the real world, not this weird Ant-Man quantum realm thing that Alma and Jacob are half trapped in. Jacob's mother, Geraldine, was a diagnosed schizophrenic. When doctors scanned her brain, they found that her ventricles were larger than most. Jacob, too, was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia and found the same large pockets in his brain. As a child, Alma became deaf when she developed pneumonia. When he looked at her brain scans in the hospital, Jacob realized that she also had those big old brain blood pockets. After scanning the brains of shamans and priestesses, he found the same thing to be true in their brains. He theorized that these people were not actually crazy, that they harnessed the power to tap into the dimensions between space and time. He actually used to experiment on Alma as a child to try to train her to harness these powers. And while in our reality, all of that sounds like the delusional thought patterns of a person with diagnosed schizophrenia, in Alma and Jacob's reality, that's exactly what's happening. It's real to them. When Alma wakes up in front of her daycare class without remembering how she got there, it's really because she was time tripping with her dad. And we believe her and Jacob because they're the protagonists, and because their reality is so visceral and sparkly and real. And that's the big question in this series. Does Alma have a mental illness like her father and grandmother? Did she hit her head on the steering wheel too hard in that car accident? Or can she really tap into a warp zone where light speed isn't a factor and time can be bent and rearranged? So, Alma begins hunting down information about her father's death and her mother's things. And okay, we haven't really talked enough about Camilla, but she is the quintessential guilt trip mom. When Alma comes out of her coma, Camilla basically calls her selfish for almost dying. She nags her to bleach her mustache and insists on nitpicking every little thing her daughter does. However, underneath all of those insecure projections on her daughter, Camilla truly loves Alma and wants her to be okay. She forces Alma to see a psychiatrist and even steals the prescription for the antipsychotics that the doctor prescribed in order to try to force Alma to take them. But of course, as soon as Alma starts asking questions about her father's death, Camilla completely shuts her down and even gets mad at her for prying. At Becca's wedding, Alma learns of La Antigua, or the Old One dance, a Mesoamerican dance performed to call forth and honor the spirits of a dancer's ancestors. Alma then seemingly uses her time manipulation powers to string together her own version of La Antigua so that she can take her father with her back to the night that he died. While she and her father trick-or-treated, he received a phone call from his TA, Farnaz, alerting him to a break-in at the research lab. He leaves Alma on the street in her Dorothy costume and rushes to the lab, convinced that someone was trying to steal his formula. Instead, he finds his wife, hysterical and looking for Alma. She confronts Jacob with the fact that she knows he's been cheating emotionally on her with Farnaz and that she knows he's been experimenting on their daughter. She tells him it's over and that he'll never see Becca or Alma again. With their research defunded and the loss of his family, Jacob convinces Farnaz to let him drive her home and then careens their car intentionally into the ravine, killing them both. Despite the fact that her father committed a murder-suicide, Alma convinces him that his life is still worth saving. She travels with him once again back to Halloween night, and this time Jacob uses his own time-traveling powers to skip his phone call. They continue trick-or-treating, and Jacob tells her that this will permanently alter the timeline. He promises that he will return soon, and that she needs to meet him at an ancient burial ground in Mexico that they visited together when Alma was little, and that he will reappear alive like nothing ever happened. After Becca and Reed's wedding, Sam and Camilla do some research on the pills that Alma was given by the psychiatrist she saw after the accident. This leads them to information about the signs and symptoms of schizophrenia, and Alma checks almost every box. Her delusions of grandeur, hallucinations, hearing voices, depression, and disconnection from reality are all markers that she might have the same illness that ultimately contributed in a lot of ways to her father's death. They try to convince her to take the pills, but Alma flees to Mexico, convinced that she's going to see her father again, permanently alive, and her current reality will merge with the altered one. Becca shows up to watch Shooting Stars with Alma while they wait for their dad to maybe show up and fix all of the brokenness and sadness and bad decisions in their lives after he died. Their dad was sick and he made some mistakes, but maybe if he came back, they could fix it. Maybe they could all be fixed. And even though they stay up almost all night waiting for their dad to return, Jacob is nowhere to be seen the next morning. Becca convinces Alma to come home and just try taking the pills. Alma agrees, but asks Becca to give her a minute. After Becca walks away, you see Alma's eyes grow wide as they and the surrounding plain is bathed in light. And then the screen cuts to black and ruins my life because I need to know what happened! I have so many questions about the ending, but the biggest one obviously is, did Jacob really come back to Reality Prime? Without the promise of a season 2, I'm low-key terrified that this will turn into like an Inception situation, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if the top ever stops spinning, or if Alma and her dad really have time-traveling superpowers or not. But okay, let's all chill out and break down what I'm going to refer to as Reality Prime and the other reality. Here's what we do know. According to string theory, and also the everything about this show, there are multiple realities that run parallel in alternate dimensions and timelines that we in Reality Prime don't even know about. There are infinite realities and infinite possibilities. So theoretically, according to real smart science people, it's totally possible that Alma really does have one foot in the living world and one foot in a billion other dimensions. If the other reality really does exist, all of Jacob Winograd's research was right. I'm personally a huge fan of this narrative in conjunction with mental illness. Shows like Undone, Legion, Maniac, and more do a really great job validating the reality that many mentally ill people grapple with on the regs. And this show does just that. I'm pretty convinced that both Reality Prime and the other reality could both be real. Jacob's theory really does seem to check out. How else would Alma know that her mother was at the lab with her father and Farnaz just minutes before they died? How else would she have been able to stop herself from ruining Becca's wedding by announcing to the guests that her sister had banged a bartender, or know so many intimate details about the security guard's lost sister? None of those things could have happened, and she couldn't have known any of that information without actually time traveling into other people's memories as well as her own. On the other hand, schizophrenia is hereditary, and her father and grandmother were both diagnosed. Her grandmother was unfortunately committed to an institution, and her father's break with reality and underlying depression caused him to kill himself and his teaching assistant. Those are the hard realities about mental illness, and sometimes it's easier to protect yourself by creating a fantasy world for yourself to exist in when it all gets too overwhelming. Schizophrenia in adult women typically presents in the late 20s and early 30s, and as Alma is 28 years old in this series, this would be the right time for her symptoms to set in. Maybe she isn't really communicating with her dad or traveling through time. Maybe she's creating an alternate reality as a coping mechanism because her mental illness has robbed her of the tools necessary to cope with her real life. And then there's the third option, straight up head trauma. It's possible that the accident caused severe brain damage. Maybe Alma is hallucinating because of the accident. And I know what you're gonna say, but she saw her dad come out of the corner of her eye before the accident. I know. That's why I'm pretty convinced that the other reality does exist. Which brings me to my next big question. What are some theories that you guys have about the ending? Of course, depending on which of the previous explanations for Alma's reality you believe, that answer might differ. So let's go over a couple of ones I've thought about so far. What if Alma's dad does return? There are two basic options here. Either he comes back and Alma's reality prime changes to a reality where her dad never died, or somehow Jacob returns to reality prime without altering it. If the first option comes true, what does that ultimately mean for Alma and her dad? Both characters believe throughout the season that once they stopped Jacob's death from happening and returned him to Alma's timeline as if he had never left, all of their problems would magically be solved. I don't know about you, but that's not how it works in any reality. Even if Alma's dad could come back to life, it's not like all of their problems would magically disappear. I understand Alma wanting to pinpoint the day her father died as the exact moment in time that she became a broken person. It's easier to blame a single event than it is to take a hard look at the summation of all of your life choices. What I'm trying to say is, even if Alma's father hadn't died that Halloween night when she was a kid, she and Jacob would still have problems. I'd love to see a second season explore those issues. For example, let's say Jacob doesn't answer the phone call and continues trick-or-treating with Alma. Hello, dude. Your wife is still back on campus tearing your office apart because she found out that you were doing science experiments on y'all's daughter. If you don't take your life that night, you're up against a lot of challenges. Those things aren't going to magically go away. Alternatively, what if Jacob does return to reality prime, but the two realities don't converge? Like, Jacob comes back, but reality prime doesn't fade away. He's all of a sudden just an undead guy walking around in a timeline where he died almost 2 decades ago. This could make for a really interesting, albeit less likely to happen, second season. Jacob could finally prove that he successfully time traveled back to the future after his own suicide to further his research. Of course, if he really is back, he probably can't go public about the whole, hey, I'm back from my murder-suicide thing without going to prison. But with Alma helping him, they could totally make a whole season about their unfinished family business. But there's also the chance that this time traveling is just part of Alma's schizophrenia. That's the reason why Alma can't see the light until Becca walks away, because it isn't really there. It's possible that Alma saw another hallucination, and that this is further proof that she needs to take her mental health more seriously. While this may be the most realistic avenue, it does fundamentally change the premise of the series. So what would a follow-up season look like? Honestly, if they did it right, it could be really interesting. I'd absolutely tune in to watch a show about Alma's follow-up therapy and whether she'd be able to incorporate her father's memory into her daily life in a healthier way while still experiencing episodes that drag her across time. Thematically, this makes sense as a huge point Undone makes, is that rejecting reality is dangerous and counterproductive. Happiness sometimes is a distraction that we must let go of to move forward. I do think that this ending is the least likely of all from a storytelling perspective. Why would they build up all of that really cool science shiz and teach Alma how to time travel if not to explore it further in season 2? And here's the truth. If there's no second season, we might never know. And I'm super okay with that because that means that we get to talk about all our different theories in the comment section and on Twitter forever! Let me know what you think happened at the end of Undone. Did her father really undo his death and time travel back to reality prime? Is Alma simply experiencing the onset symptoms of a hereditary mental illness? Did she see Fox Mulder and Dana Scully chasing an alien out of that cave instead? Talk it out in the comments and like and subscribe to Nerdwire. Check us out on Patreon and be very careful where you time travel.